Sign it, or get out of my son's wedding. My mother-in-law's voice didn't shake. It never shook. That was the thing about Nadine. She delivered cruelty the way other women delivered pleasantries. Smooth. Practiced. Like she'd been rehearsing it her whole life. The rehearsal dinner was still going on 20 feet away. I could hear the string quartet, the laughter, the champagne glasses clinking. My husband-to-be, correction, my soon-to-be ex-husband, was out there toasting with his groomsmen, completely unaware that his mother had just cornered me in the coat room with a 2-page legal document and a Mont Blanc pen. The document was a postnuptial agreement. I'd seen the draft before. My name at the top, Marcus's name below it, and 4 pages of language that essentially said, if this marriage dissolves for any reason, Nora Calloway walks away with nothing. No stake in the Whitmore family business. No claim to the Malibu property. No settlement. Nothing. Nadine had tried to get me to sign a version of this before the engagement. I'd said no. She'd tried again 6 months later, after we'd already set the date. I'd said no again. Now here we were, 12 hours before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, and she was trying one more time. The difference was, this time she wasn't asking. Nora. She said my name like it was a stain. You are a substitute teacher from Bakersfield. My son makes $7 million a year. You know what that document is. It's a formality. Sign it. Smile. And tomorrow morning you become a Whitmore. That's the best deal you will ever get in your life. I looked at the pen in her hand. I looked at the document on the shelf between a rack of fur coats and a box of gift bags. I picked up the pen. She exhaled. I set it back down. I'm not signing anything tonight, I said, and if Marcus wants me to sign something, Marcus can ask me himself. The smile that crossed her face wasn't angry. It was worse than angry. It was patient, like a chess player who already knew the board. He will, she said. And when he does, you'll wish you'd just done it quietly with me. She took the document, folded it once, and walked back toward the sound of the string quartet. I stood there in the coat room alone, surrounded by other people's expensive jackets, and I let myself feel the thing I had been suppressing for 3 years. I had made a terrible mistake, not in refusing to sign, in letting it get this far. Before I tell you what happened in that chapel the next morning, and why the IRS Criminal Investigation Division was involved before noon, I want to ask you something in the comments. Have you ever looked at a person you were supposed to love and realized you had never really seen them at all? Tell me where you're watching from, because this story travels further than I ever expected. I need to back up, because if I just start with the wedding, you won't understand what I was walking away from. You won't understand why it took me so long, and you won't understand why, when it finally ended, I wasn't the one who fell. I met Marcus when I was 28. He was charming in the way that certain men learn to be charming, deliberately, strategically, with just enough warmth to make you lower your guard before you notice you've done it. He was handsome. He came from money. He said all the right things about my career, about ambition, about how he loved that I was real. That word, real. Like I was an artifact. Like he'd found something genuine in a world full of counterfeits and wanted to keep it behind glass. I was a substitute teacher. That part is true. What Nadine didn't know, what none of them knew, was that being a substitute teacher was something I did on Tuesdays and Thursdays because I liked kids and I liked having a reason to leave the house. What I did the rest of the week was run Halcyon Capital Management. I founded Halcyon at 24 with $40,000, a Series 65 license, and a client list of exactly 3 people, all of whom were friends of my college roommate. By 28, we were managing $200 million in assets. By 31, the year I met Marcus, we were at $1.4 billion. By the rehearsal dinner, where Nadine cornered me in the coat room, we were managing just under $3 billion and had offices in Austin, Chicago, and New York. Nobody in the Whitmore family knew any of this. I had kept it quiet deliberately. Not because I was hiding it exactly, more because I had spent my entire adult life watching people change the moment they found out how much money was involved. Friends got weird. Dates got calculating. Family started asking for things. I was so tired of being seen as a resource instead of a person that when I met Marcus, when he seemed to like me without any of that attached, I just didn't bring it up. Then I fell in love with him, or something that felt like love. Something close enough that I confused it for the real thing for 3 years. I noticed the cracks slowly. The way he talked about money, not with ambition, but with a kind of entitlement, like it was something owed to him. The way his mother called twice a day, and he always stepped outside to take the calls. The way the prenup appeared 6 months into the engagement, presented as a routine formality, drafted by Nadine's personal attorney without Marcus mentioning it in advance. I started paying closer attention. I have access to things that most people don't. When you manage institutional capital, you develop relationships with forensic accountants, private investigators, and risk analysts the way other people develop relationships with their dry cleaner. You call them when you need them. You trust them absolutely. I started calling them in March. What they found took until October to fully document. The Whitmore family business, a commercial real estate development firm, had been using a network of shell companies to inflate construction costs on public contracts. The difference was siphoned off into a separate account in Delaware, then moved through a series of LLCs before landing in an offshore account tied to a trust Marcus had been a beneficiary of since he was 19. He didn't run the scheme, but he knew about it. He had known for years. There was more. The Malibu property Nadine had mentioned in the coat room, the one she wanted to make sure I'd have no claim to, wasn't titled in Marcus's name. It was held by one of the shell companies, which meant it had been partially funded with money that was, depending on how the DOJ chose to characterize it, either fraud proceeds or tax evasion. Possibly both. The postnuptial agreement she'd been trying to get me to sign, it wasn't just about protecting family assets, it was about insulating Marcus from any future liability that might attach to a spouse. If I signed, and if the whole structure eventually collapsed, I'd have no legal standing to argue I was unaware. I'd just be the wife who signed the paper and said nothing. She wasn't protecting her son from a gold digger. She was protecting her son from me specifically, because somewhere in the 3 years I'd been quietly attending their family dinners and not correcting them when they called me just a teacher, someone had gotten nervous. I found out later it was their accountant. He'd run my name as a routine check and hit a wall of LLCs and holding companies that, even to a professional, were difficult to trace. He told Nadine something wasn't adding up. She didn't know what she was looking at, but she knew enough to be afraid of it. The postnuptial was her move. She was trying to neutralize me before she understood what she was dealing with. On the morning of the wedding, I got up at 6. I showered. I sat in a hotel room in my robe and I drank a cup of coffee and I looked out at the Pacific and I made a decision that had been building for 8 months. I picked up my phone and I sent 3 emails. The first was to my attorney, authorizing the transfer of a packet of documents to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, documents our forensic team had spent months compiling. The second was to the partner at the private equity firm that had been quietly acquiring distressed commercial real estate assets in Southern California. Whitmore Development had 3 over-leveraged projects in escrow. I'd been watching them for 4 months. I authorized the acquisition of the senior debt position on all 3. The third email was to Marcus. It said, "We need to talk before the ceremony. Meet me in the hotel garden at 8. Come alone." I got dressed. Not in the wedding gown. I put on a cream blazer, dark slacks, and the only piece of jewelry I ever wear, a simple gold bracelet my grandmother left me. I walked down to the garden at 8 o'clock. He was already there. He looked nervous, which meant Nadine had already called him. He was holding his phone too tightly. "You talked to my mom," he said. "She talked to me," I said. 12 hours ago, in the coat room. She's just protective. Marcus. I kept my voice level. I had promised myself I would keep my voice level. "I need you to tell me the truth about something. Not the version your mother coached you on. The truth. Did you know about the Delaware accounts?" The silence lasted 4 seconds. "I know because I counted." "That's complicated," he said. "It's a yes or no question." He looked at me. He looked at his phone. He looked back at me. And then he said something that I think he believed was a reasonable thing to say. "Nora, that's just how business works in this industry. Nobody gets hurt." I had prepared myself for anger. What I felt instead was something colder than anger. A kind of clarity, clean and total, like the moment a fog lifts and you can finally see how far you actually are from shore. "Okay," I said. "Okay?" He looked relieved. He actually looked relieved. "So you understand. It's just structure. It doesn't change anything between us." "I need you to come inside," I said. "There's something I want to show your family before we do anything else today." He followed me back into the hotel. I walked through the lobby to the private dining room where the bridal party breakfast was being held. Nadine was there. His father, Jean. His sister with her fiancé. 3 or 4 family friends, 14 people total, arranged around a long table with mimosas and fruit plates and little cards with everyone's names. They all looked up when I walked in. I set my phone on the table and pulled up the email I'd sent at 6 that morning, the one to the IRS. I want to walk you through something, I said. And I want to do it before anyone calls a lawyer, because once lawyers are involved, this conversation gets a lot less human. Nadine stood up. Nora, this is not the time. Sit down, I said. It came out quietly. She sat. I turned to Marcus's father, Gene, the Delaware accounts, the ones tied to the Clearwater Group LLC. I've been aware of them since April. I have documentation of 62 wire transfers over 4 years totaling approximately $8.3 million. As of 45 minutes ago, so does the IRS. The room went completely still. That's not, Gene started. I'm not finished. I turned to Nadine. The Malibu property, the one you mentioned last night. I know you hold it through the Meridian Trust. I know the trust was capitalized partly with proceeds from the inflated contracts. I also know that you filed a homestead exemption on it in 2021, which is fraudulent, because it's not a primary residence, it's a business asset being used as a personal one. That's a separate issue, but it's in the same packet. Nadine's face had gone from furious to something I'd never seen on her. Afraid. I looked at Marcus. He was standing in the doorway, still holding his phone. I'm not doing this to hurt you, I said, and I meant it. I'm doing this because last night your mother asked me to sign a document that would have made me legally complicit in all of this, and I think you knew she was going to ask me. I think that's why you never mentioned the prenup before the engagement. I think you knew what this family was, and you thought if you could get me to sign things piece by piece, none of it would ever reach me. Nora. His voice cracked. I love you. I know you believe that, I said, but you loved your family's money more, and you loved your mother's approval more. And I think you always knew this day would come, and you were hoping I'd be someone who went along with it. I picked up my phone. The wedding is not happening today, I said. The hotel has been notified. The guests will be informed. I've already spoken to the coordinator. I paused. I'm sorry to the people in this room who aren't involved in any of this. I'm genuinely sorry for the disruption. I turned to leave. I made it 4 steps before I heard the chair scrape. It was Gene. He was on his feet, his face deep red. The kind of red that on a man his age means one of 2 things. He pointed at me across the table. You think you can walk in here and blow up our family and just walk out? Who the hell do you think you are? I turned back around slowly. I'm the person who's been managing $2.9 billion in client assets for 6 years, I said. I'm the founder of Halcyon Capital Management, which, as of this morning, holds the senior debt position on 3 of your Irvine projects. I'm also the person who has been attending your family dinners for 3 years and listening to your wife call me a substitute teacher like it was an insult. I paused. I am not your daughter-in-law, but I am your largest creditor. The silence in that room was different from the coat room silence the night before. The coat room had been controlled. Nadine's silence. Nadine's power. This silence belonged to everyone, and no one knew what to do with it. Marcus sat down. I don't know if his legs gave out or if he chose to sit. Either way, he sat. Gene was still standing, but the red had drained from his face and left something gray behind. Nadine looked at me with an expression I will remember for the rest of my life. It wasn't hatred, it was recognition. Like she was finally seeing, after 3 years of looking right at me, what she had actually been dealing with. You planned this, she said. I responded to this, I said. There's a difference. I turned and walked out. This time, nobody came after me. The lobby was full of wedding guests arriving. I walked through them in my cream blazer and I smiled at people I recognized and I kept moving. My assistant met me at the valet stand with my overnight bag. I had asked her to be there at 9. I had been planning this exit for longer than I want to admit. We drove north on PCH with the windows down. The Pacific was silver and flat and enormous. I didn't cry. I had done my crying in March, sitting alone in my apartment with the first forensic report open on my laptop, finally understanding that the thing I had been afraid to know was exactly as bad as I'd feared. By the time I got back to the city, my phone had 47 missed calls, 30 from Marcus, 6 from Nadine, the rest from numbers I didn't recognize, probably attorneys. I handed my phone to my assistant and asked her to log the calls and not respond to any of them. Then I called my own attorney. Here's what I need you to understand about what came next. Because I've told this story a few times now, and people always want the clean version, the dramatic version. They want the part where justice arrives in a helicopter and everyone gets what they deserve in the span of an afternoon. Real life isn't usually that clean. But sometimes, not always. Not even often, but sometimes it is. The IRS CI referral moved faster than expected because we hadn't just handed them a tip. We had handed them a complete evidentiary package. wire transfers, corporate filings, bank records cross-referenced against public contracts, a timeline, and 2 sworn statements from former Whitmore employees who had been documenting discrepancies for years and had nowhere to put them until we reached out. Gene was formally under investigation within 6 weeks. His attorney advised him to step down from the company's board immediately. He did. The 3 Irvine projects went into default 90 days after I acquired the debt position. We offered a workout agreement that included full financial disclosure as a condition. They accepted. The Clearwater Group LLC was dissolved as part of the process. The Malibu property was eventually seized as part of a civil forfeiture proceeding. Nadine fought it for 8 months. She lost. Marcus called me once, about 4 months after the wedding that didn't happen. He didn't leave a voicemail. I didn't call back. I want to tell you something about the story I just told you, because I think people sometimes hear this kind of story and they take the wrong thing from it. This wasn't about revenge. I know it sounds like revenge. I know the part where I walked into the breakfast and laid it all out looks like a performance. Maybe it was, a little. I'm not perfect. There was a part of me that had been waiting a long time to stop pretending to be smaller than I was. And maybe I chose that moment partly because I wanted them to see it. But mostly, I did it because I had been asked, the night before my own wedding, to sign a document that would have made me legally entangled in a fraud I had spent 8 months documenting. And the only way to end that cleanly was to end it completely, in front of everyone, with no ambiguity about what I knew and when I knew it. The thing nobody tells you about building something quietly, about keeping your work separate from your relationships, about not leading with your resume, is that eventually someone will mistake your silence for weakness. They will build an entire architecture of assumptions on top of it, and when you finally stop being quiet, the whole structure comes down. I didn't lose a marriage that morning. I closed a position that should have been liquidated a year earlier. The gold bracelet is still on my wrist. My grandmother left it to me with a note that said, "Don't let anyone tell you what you're worth. You're the only one who runs those numbers." I think about that a lot. I still think about that coat room sometimes. The way Nadine held out that pen like she was doing me a favor. The way she said, "Substitute teacher from Bakersfield." Not as a fact, but as a verdict. For a long time, I let people hand me verdicts like that. I took them quietly and filed them away, and kept building anyway, alone in the background where no one was watching. I used to think that was humility. I've since realized it was something more complicated. A habit I'd developed of making myself invisible so people would have no reason to come after me. It worked, mostly, until it didn't. What happened with Marcus and his family wasn't really about money. I know it looks like it was about money, but the money was just the language they used. Underneath it was something simpler and older. They needed me to be less than them. They had built their entire self-image on a hierarchy, and I was supposed to occupy a particular rung on it. When I didn't, when I quietly refused to perform the smallness they expected, it made them afraid. And afraid people reach for control. That postnuptial agreement wasn't greed. It was fear wearing a legal document. I don't think Marcus was a bad person in the way that his mother was calculating. I think he was a person who had never once been asked to choose between his family's comfort and someone else's dignity. When that moment finally came, he chose wrong. He chose it in 4 seconds of silence that told me everything I had spent 3 years not wanting to know. That clarity, the cold, clean kind, doesn't come from being smart. I want to be honest about that. I had access to forensic accountants and risk analysts and 8 months of documented evidence, and I still almost walked down that aisle. Intelligence alone doesn't save you from wanting something to be true. What saved me was something quieter and slower. The willingness to keep looking at things I didn't want to see, to keep asking questions I didn't want answered, and to sit with the discomfort of not knowing instead of reaching for the easier story. My grandmother used to say that the longest road anyone ever travels is the one between knowing something and acting on it. She wasn't wrong. I knew something was off long before April. I knew it in the way you know things you haven't yet permitted yourself to name. The courage wasn't in walking into that breakfast. The courage was in every small moment before it. Every time I picked up the phone and made the call I didn't want to make. Every time I read another page of the report instead of closing the laptop and pretending I hadn't opened it. What I want people to take from this, if anything, is not that you should be suspicious of everyone you love. It's that integrity has a direction. It moves outward from how you treat yourself first. Nadine had spent decades rationalizing small dishonesties until they became structural fraud. Marcus had spent a lifetime choosing comfort over conscience until he couldn't tell the difference anymore. And I had spent 3 years choosing hope over evidence until the evidence became impossible to ignore. None of us arrive at a single dramatic moment, fully formed. We build toward it, one quiet choice at a time. The bracelet is still on my wrist. I think it will be for a long time.